Welcome to the Phil Cooke podcast. Today we're going to talk to David Baker from givingdesign.com. David is a fundraising consultant, and it's interesting about David. He works with a lot of ministries and nonprofits and churches of all sizes, but he's really an expert at smaller churches and organizations. How you start, how you get going, what you need to think about. So the next 40 minutes or so are going to be a terrific conversation in how to launch your ministry, how to launch your nonprofit, your idea, how to raise the money to make that launch happen. And I think it's going to spur a lot of excitement in people, and a lot of things are going to happen as a result of this, because this is great information, and I'd encourage you stay throughout. And at the end, we'll give you some great information about how to get in touch with David and how to get more resources from him. He's got an online class. He's got a great podcast called The Giving Room, and I would encourage you to check it out. And in the meantime, stay tuned for this incredible conversation with David Baker. David Baker, welcome to the podcast. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time because you are a fundraising guru. And honestly, people have an unnatural fear of fundraising. Now, granted, there's been a lot of criticism out there lately, and there's been a lot of people who have taken advantage and taken it too far. But real fundraising starts in the Bible, right? I mean, it has a biblical foundation. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's maybe the comfort that people need if they're a little bit afraid, or they feel like they're, they're all alone, or why do we even have to do this thing? They're in good company because, Moses actually led one of the very first capital campaigns that, we ever know about. David did the same thing. And then there's others, Nehemiah did some things. And then Paul gives us great theology and I think some great comfort. So, and then interesting, we'll probably get to this a little bit later, but in the case of Moses, and this is like the first campaign, and like he's like the greatest campaign counsel of all time, because he actually had to tell people to stop giving. It's like, so they actually gave more than they need. I think there's a passage in Exodus that actually says that. So he's like, tell them to stop. We've got everything we need and more. And I think there's probably some, church and ministry leaders that would love to say those words. And
I'd love to have that problem. Absolutely.
Right. Like so everything we need and more. Please stop. So
you get excited about fundraising, but most people are terrified, including me. Maybe it's being terrified to ask, being terrified at the thought of it. I mean, what makes people so nervous about asking for financial support?
I think it's basically too small a view. They feel like, I'm doing this, and they wrongly feel like they're asking for themselves. Like, even if it's their own ministry, their own church, it's like, I'm asking. And if you happen to tell me no, you've literally told me no. And I think that's sort of the wrong place to start. I'd mentioned Paul a second ago when we talked about how Moses was great and David did. The great thing about David is he actually gave personally too, not just out of the, the coffers of the of the throne room and the treasury. So he gave personally and they encouraged people to give for the temple. But then Paul in Philippians chapter 4. So early in chapter 4, we get one of the verses that we misapply nearly daily in Christian circles. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Right.
And we apply it to nonsense like, field goals and such. So like that, and maybe that's true. But Paul was actually saying like he'd learned to live with a lot and he'd learned to live with a little, and he knew that God had him no matter what the case was. But then you go a little bit further into Philippians 4, and I think this is the key for it not being, icky or fearsome, fear and laden for people that are in fundraising, is he actually says, it's not that I seek the gift, but I seek the profit, which is to your account. So after Paul just got done saying, God's got me, but what God may have for you is actually to fund this thing. And while you're funding it, and, that thing happened to be missionary journey, church planting, evangelism, all of the effort that allows, non-Jews to participate in this kingdom thing, right? So that when you give to this missionary evangelism, church planting work, he's actually saying it's as if you did it. So it's like giving isn't just like joining Paul, it's actually doing it alongside of Paul. And I think that if you start with that mindset, that I'm giving somebody an opportunity to actually join in this work and in the outcomes, especially in the church and ministry context where there's a kingdom outcome, that sort of takes the pressure off, because you're not asking for you, and you're not even asking for your ministry or your church. You're asking for them. Like, this is good for you. You're actually going to get benefit in the kingdom economy, it's going to be as if you did these outcomes. And I think that's like liberating and freeing and encouraging. And it's even the invitation you give your donors. You're like, you have the opportunity to actually do what we do. It's you doing it,
That's
we talk
fantastic.
about.
Well, it's interesting. You've done some research between giving from individuals and giving from like government grants and things like that. And, what are your thoughts? Most people start out by saying, instead of, going through the nightmare of asking people for money, people I know, especially, let's see about government grants. What's your position on that kind of thing?
Well, I think if you watch the news, in the last, 12 months, even less than that, 8 months, you've seen that there's some insecurity in the government grant world, strokes of pens change things. And not to mention, even if you got that grant, there was probably sort of a long runway to even get it. And then I think what we found is it's precarious to keep it, especially if it's in a politically charged area. And then just even like, where does money come from? So there's some folks in Indiana, Giving USA, that follow where does money come from. We usually change it in our firm and call it, where does generosity come from? And the reality is that corporations, they give about 7.5%. That's where, all the giving. So in 2024, so in 25, we got the 24 numbers. In a couple months, we'll have 25 numbers in Mayish. We usually get those. But in 24, just under $600 billion given. So $600 billion given in that calendar year, 2024. And then of all of that, only 7.5% came from corporations, and only 18.5% came from foundations. And in that corporations and foundations piece, then you factor in so where did the government come from? They're not even on the chart, actually. So people gave 66.2%. So almost 400 billion of the 600 billion that was given came from individuals. So, and then on top of that, 7.7%, and it's always fluctuated between 7 and 9%, of dead people gave. So out of their trust, right? Their estate. So the bequest. Okay. So the living and the dead, gave, 66.2 and 7.7%. And I'd say if you're in a smaller shop or if you're in a church, so that's where you should focus. And if you're in a ministry startup and you just think that the government grant piece is where to go, or there's even corporate grants in your area, it's not a great place to start. And I think, if you found the right 10 individuals, you'd beat it and you'd go faster, right? And then you may have some stakeholders that are with you for the long haul that won't be as potentially fickle, as there's changes in, political winds. So.
Well, that's a good point, because it's always better, I think, to have people that understand what you're doing and even better experienced it. I know a lot of organizations that are doing mission work or maybe work feeding the poor in other countries, to take some of their key donors and experience it and see it makes much more of an impact. And you're right, it keeps them on for the long haul versus getting a government grant that those people, it's behind a bureaucracy. They're not going to see what you're doing. So it's all about paperwork for them.
Yeah. We actually talk a lot about what's real donor stewardship, and invitation is one of the things that I think just falls flat. And, nobody's doing invitation, but just as you mentioned, if you can take a donor with you, it doesn't have to be overseas. It can be around the block. If you're running a soup kitchen, or you've got some sort of outreach to an inner city area, but either one, right? Either go to Thailand or, go around the block, let them see what's happening. And the likelihood that they'll actually become a stakeholder and give more on their own without you even asking them to give is high. But so we say invitation is donor glue. That is the way to keep donors, is to, and what you're doing is showing them impact, right? You're you're actually doing this. Let's go back to what Paul said. So they see this thing and you're because you gave, this is happening. And Paul actually says, because you gave, it's like you're doing it. You're here watching it and you did it. So, I think
along that line, what does motivate givers? What is the best way to get somebody motivated toward giving towards your cause?
It comes down to vision. I think sometimes there's this sort of balance of outputs and outcomes in this world. And so outputs is what we do. And that's what it's always easiest for us to talk about. we tell people what we do all the time, whether it's our church or whether it's our ministry. But sometimes we forget to share, what happens when we do it, the outcomes.
Yes.
And it's the outcomes, that's where there's vision. There can be vision around the outcomes, not just we're going to do more, give more so we can do more. It's give more and we're going to have this exponential, thing. Like we'll actually not just reach more people,
Right.
do more of the same, but there's something bigger we can do. And again, it's like you did it. So that's the thing. And I think that experience, the invitation piece is part of that. And then story is a part of that. Like this is your expertise, right? Like story is so important. We try to tell folks all the time that, data gets referenced and stories get remembered. And I haven't ever really seen anybody moved to a big gift by a spreadsheet, but I've seen them moved to a big gift by either hearing a story, whether that was in written form or in video, all the things that you've done for your entire lifetime, or this trip, right? You go across to the other side of the world and you see, people engaged in worship that, were in whatever, prostitution or something worse, before that. So I think the stories, collecting stories is so important. That's like missed in our nonprofit space, like what's your story, leadership team and staff? Why do you do this? Why do your donors give? And then what's the testimony of the people that you've served? Like, so let's see what the kingdom impact is. And, I think that's why people give.
It's interesting. I for a long time, I've pushed our clients, churches and ministries especially, to have someone on their staff that keeps track of great stories that come out as a result of their ministry. You've had people you've led to Christ, or you've had people that you've housed or fed, or whatever it is you do. And you need to tell those stories, because if donors don't hear those stories, it didn't happen. So, it's so important that you have somebody digging out and finding. I have them look for letters and emails they get from people that have been blessed by the ministry in some capacity. And outcomes too are super, super important. I remember in the days when a lot of Bible translators would publish Bibles in different languages and raise money, that we published, 1 million Bibles last year in, some language. But I was overseas one time, and a guy took me to a warehouse in his country that was filled with those Bibles, because the illiteracy rate was so high in his country, nobody could read them. And so it's outcomes that matter. Do people actually engage with what you do? And are you actually changing people's lives? So all that stuff is really, I can tell you from experience, it's really important.
Yeah. So that output, just to make this clear for folks, is that we produced these Bibles, and that is a good thing. And we even got them in the hands of people, or could have gotten them in the hands of people. But the outcome we're looking for is that actually, got into their hands and into their heart, and, changed their life for eternity. Like that.
Yes.
Like that's the outcome. And that outcome will bring major gifts, more than the other. So that's how you develop stakeholders that stay with you for a long time.
So when it comes to asking, what kind of projects, gifts, ministries, what kind of things seem to ring a bell with people? I know people change, cultures change, people changes. And over the years, I remember when I was in the early part of my career, people would give to build. I think my parents' generation gave to build. So they built big universities like Oral Roberts University. They built hospitals. They built ministry outreaches. They built Campus Crusade. They built huge projects, but that ended. And people today aren't giving toward building nearly as much as they give toward great causes and things like that. I mean, do things change, and what seems to be the sweet spot right now?
Yeah, I think anything that's sort of meeting felt needs is like the thing. And, a felt need is like, so how does this thing impact me? And I think as we get into younger generations, it's like, even though we have this big wealth transfer coming, and we should probably talk about that. Because that's like why churches and ministries need to think about planned giving. But in the right now, you've got, 20 somethings, 30 somethings, even 40 somethings, even young 50 somethings that are like sort of trying to figure out, well, this all seemed a little broken to me. And I'm not in the same place that my parents were, or my grandparents were, depending on your age. And so maybe this institutional thing like that, I don't see much value in that. At least I don't share the same value. I mean, we've definitely seen that, whether it's universities or whether it's mainline churches. There's just a different perspective that this younger crowd has. I think they also want to roll up their sleeves more, so they're not interested in just having this edifice as much as they are as having this impact. And I think they want to, have a little actual skin in the game. So, creating those, this goes back to invitations. Look, like, how can I invite somebody into this piece, not just financially, is gonna change. And then the more that outcome is going to ping on making somebody's life better on the daily, I think is what resonates with folks. They're less interested in monuments and more interested in moments, I think, is what I'd say.
And you really kind of have to target the audience you're pitching to, because not everybody's going to give to your project or your cause, right? And you have to be willing to live with that and move on.
Yeah, well, I think, and actually, one of the best ways to actually win somebody over is when you hear, we talk about ability to give, affinity to your mission, and access. Like, that's how you choose who you're going to go. So we don't just start and decide that Oprah's on our list, right? That's ridiculous. But do we have access to them? Do they have affinity to our mission, and do they have the ability to give? That's how we narrow down. We don't have unlimited time. We don't have unlimited resources, so we have to focus on those three things. And I think the affinity piece is, it's a listening game. And if you've kind of thought through every camera angle of your ministry and without losing your integrity and trying to spin something or shoehorn it into if you can say, hey, man, I just heard that it sounds like the Holy Spirit's really working on you to support XYZ. That's kind of out of our wheelhouse, but I know this ministry around town or across the country or wherever it is that's doing exactly that. Can I introduce you to them? And we've done that before, and those people end up being donors because they appreciate that you didn't, treat them like an ATM, and you connected them to what, God was actually stirring their heart to do. And then you find out that, he may have stirred it back to you. So a little bit of patience and a little bit of integrity and a little bit of an introduction can go a long way.
That's really good. And I think too, doing your homework matters when it comes to getting donors. It's funny. Our company, Cooke Media Group, had an incredible privilege and opportunity to do all the media leading up to the launch of the Museum of the Bible. So we had crews there once a month for 3 years, filming the construction and the launch and the archive, the collection, which is staggering. And but because we got to know the primary donor, Steve Green, really well, now, and of course the Green family is owns Hobby Lobby, and they've been incredibly generous with ministries and organizations. People will hit me up saying, I know my project, if they could only hear it, that'd be great. And I know what they give to, because I know them. I know their criteria, that their family will get together once a month and they'll go over projects, and they have a very strict list of things they're passionate about supporting. And even though I know something is totally out of the range, people keep hitting me up. No, if they could just heard this, I think it would change their mind. And I don't know how to get through to those people, but doing your homework and finding out what people are passionate about giving toward as much as you can. You can't do that with everybody, but as much as you possibly can, I think surely that's pretty critical.
Yeah. Well, and in every case, I'll actually say that statement. So in every case, like your next sort of major gift is in your database already, so like, you don't have to go guess what the Green family supports. You don't have to, try to persuade them. You actually just need to build relationships with the people that have already raised their hand, right? They've already made some sort of a gift. So go talk to them and, and figure out whatever it is. We get asked all the time, so what's a major gift? And I'm like, well, let me see let me see what your gifts were last year, and I'll tell you what your major gift is. Because there's no one answer to what's a major gift. There's organizations where, $500 is a super major gift, and there's organizations where, $500,000 is a major gift. So it's like, it depends is the answer. And that sounds like a lawyer thing, but, I'm allowed to do that, so it's okay. But it's just true. And, I think you look and you see, okay, well, we've got these couple people that give us $1,000. And we got these people that do, a little over 500. You should go talk to them, because anybody that gives you $1,000 can probably give you more. And anybody that gives you $500 like a couple times a year can definitely give you more. So it's just like, find out what motivates them and see if any of their friends could be interested in the same thing. So I think,
that's great.
Just listening and meeting
and
treating people like they're, humans that you're appreciative of goes a long way, and is better than, send an email to Phil and saying, I know you work with the Green family. Can you pitch my project?
Yeah.
No. Go pitch it to your database right now.
So I want to start something new. I want to start a new, I've got a great idea for a ministry, an outreach, some kind of a cause. where do I start? And when it comes to raising money, I mean, I don't have a database of 100,000 names. I don't have big donors behind me or a grant. Where's the best place to start?
With your circle, right? You start with your circle. It's funny. I've asked this question again and again and again. I'd be like, okay, so have you talked to your mom, about this? And obviously, it depends on the age of the person, right? So, like, if your mom's still around and your mom doesn't think it's a great idea, it may not be a great idea. That doesn't mean moms have full veto authority, but start there. Like, I'm like, just go talk to your mom. It's like great practice. And then I've told people, you just need like 3 people. If you could just find 3 people that are of means and that are connected and that are passionate, they hit those 3 A's, right? The ability to give, affinity to whatever you're doing, and you've got access to them because they're in your friend circle or they're one removed, right? Like, when you've got those 3 things, if you just can find like 3 to 5 of those people, you probably have 20 that you can get to. And that's how you start. And it's all just telling the story. And, and at that point, you may not have outcomes, but you know that if I do these things, I'm pretty sure this is going to happen, or I've done it in this sort of micro way, and I'm trying to do it in this macro way now. And, I think, we can take the 1 + 1 = 2 and make it, 1 + 1 = 50 or 100. If we have more people come alongside us. So I think that's where you start. It's literally conversations, and you start with your circle.
Someone once told me, start with your contacts list, your personal contact list.
Yes.
Maybe go through that and send out an email blast or 2. Is that crazy, or is that another good example of just starting where you can?
Yeah, that's what I mean. I said start with your circle. So I'm just saying start with your family and then move out. But hopefully you've got a friend or 2 or a professional acquaintance that will ping on the same affinity. And then you're kind of off to the races. But you got to find those few. Otherwise, you're going to be at it alone the whole time.
Has social media proven to be much of a help when it comes to fundraising and that sort of thing?
No. So
okay,
it can build awareness. It tends to not. And again, so all my perspective is like major gifts, plan giving, right? So I'm less interested in the $20 a month person, and I'm more interested in the $20,000 person, or the $200,000 person, or the $2 million person. Not because I think they're more important. I just think we can go stronger, faster, right?
Yeah.
And if I have limited time, limited resources, I'm going for that. But you got to do both. Sometimes you got to do both.
Okay. Well, let me interrupt you here. The $20,000 person, do bigger gifts come with more strings? Whereas the $20 person just gives, and they're not going to be as worried about where it goes or how it goes.
I mean, sometimes they do, but here's what's interesting. This is going to kind of turn this on its head a little bit. Like, let's take our $20,000 donor. Let's even make it a $10,000 donor, because I've lived this multiple times. $10,000 donor versus $1 million donor. Way more strings with a $10,000 donor than there is with the $1 million donor. So, there's a lot more fear and control issues with the $10,000 donor than the $1 million donor has. The person that can give you $1 million probably doesn't have time to look at your budget, and they just, there's just got to be some credibility that got them there in the first place, which may or may not have been you. That may have been, a friend in your in your address book, and you've got the credibility already, and they don't have time to look at the numbers. They hear the story, they want that impact, and they're going to invest in it. Contrasted to, I've had multiple $10,000 donors that want to see every line item of the budget, know exactly where every penny's going, and it just sort of ironic the way that plays out. So it's kind of in the middle, where there may be more strings, and if it's not more strings, it's more maybe accountability that may be even a little onerous at times.
It's interesting you say that, because in our work at Cooke Media Group with filming and the video projects we've done, when we're working with a smaller ministry, mom and pop ministry, something relatively small, they're super nervous about it. They're super nervous. They want to be there when we shoot, and, they're slow to write sign the checks. But if it's a big major ministry, a big organization, or a nonprofit, they just write the check and move on, because they're used to that. They're much more corporate in their thinking. And, so I can imagine it's the same with givers. The people are probably very successful. They're used to that kind of business-like attitude. So it probably makes a lot of sense. All right, let's shift a little bit. Okay. Tell me about planned giving. What does that mean exactly?
So this is like a buzzword jargony thing. So like it's one of those things like everybody's supposed to be doing it, everybody wants to be doing it, nobody knows how to do it, right? So it's like I mean like you mentioned Oral Roberts, like the universities, they know how to do it. They've got whole teams dedicated to just doing that. But when you start stripping away and get down to a smaller development team, then that can be a little more of a challenge. I think part of the problem, and this comes like when there's a struggle to get some sort of a plan giving program or marketing or professional even in place, is plan giving in our mind means deferred, right? It means I'm not going to get this till it may be somebody else in this seat. Like if I'm the executive director or if I'm the pastor, it's like plan giving, that's funding the next person. That's not that's not helping me right now, and I need money right now. So we just don't think about it. And I think what's wrong about that is like not all planned gifts are deferred gifts. There's a lot of planned gifts that are like now. So like this misperception that planned means deferred. Planned just means, they had to think about it. And that may have been, they had to think about timing. They had to think about succession issues for their business. They had to think about their family. They had to think about, is there disability? Is there, enough money for spouses and children and grandchildren? Like planning is all of that, am I going to sell a business? Do I have, real estate that, I am using, but the kids that don't want it, like all these things, like that's planning.
Yeah.
Do I have an IRA and I'm over, 70 and a half? And if I take the mandatory distribution every year, once I get to 72 and a half, I creates a tax problem for me. Like I actually don't want that money. There's a lot of people out there who do not want that money because it creates a tax burden. Well, QCDs, qualified charitable distributions, are this beautiful thing, that they can give. It's indexed for inflation now, so it's over $100,000 a year that they can give to the charities of their choice, and that's beautiful. That's planning, but that's an immediate thing. Like every year, people are doing this, so like this can actually support your annual fund or your capital campaign or whatever it is. But I would definitely call a QCD a planned gift because it's got a tax planning piece to it. There's probably a family planning piece to it. There's a daily income planning piece. So planned giving is really just I'd say major gifts is a better way to talk about it because then we don't mess up in our mind that it's a deferred thing. So we use major gifts and planned gifts as a synonym in the context of things we do for giving design with our clients. So, I think that's the first fix, is realizing that this can be a now thing, like stock gifts. So, the stock market's done great, in the last several years. And folks have more assets in the stock market than they have in actual, checking accounts. Now they tend to just give from their checking account. I think, according to the National Christian Foundation, 10%, this is a generality, right? But about 10% of all your assets are in cash and the rest are in these other vehicles, whether it's retirement accounts, brokerage accounts and things, houses, land, businesses. But we give 25% of our giving comes from that 10% slice. So, if we can start giving from assets, that's planned giving, because that's taking a little bit of expertise and a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of knowing all the circumstances to plan that is the best gift versus cash, giving actually from a real estate portfolio or giving from an investment portfolio or giving from my IRA. And all those things can be now gifts, but we call them planned giving. So I think the first battle is thinking it's always deferred and realizing, okay, this can be a now thing and it can be really good.
That's good. So you've worked with a lot of churches, a lot of ministries over the years. What's the biggest mistake you see most people making when it comes to fundraising?
They're focusing on cash. So I actually sat in my church. They know I've already talked to them about this, so they would join me in this walk of shame. I'm going to take them down. But I actually sat in a seniors meeting about this capital effort that was going on last year. And I was going to say we just needed to raise $5 million. It's one of the fastest growing churches in the country, so that shouldn't be a hard thing, right? And We've got 200-ish people, all seniors in this room. The vision is great. Everything is great. And they get to the very end, and there's really like no ask. There was no mention of like ways that seniors could give that other people couldn't give. No. Oh, and then even if you can't give now, maybe you could actually give later, right? Because we always talk about giving now and giving later and once in a lifetime giving. So all that now things, these are all planned gifts. But if I'm at a place as a senior where I can't let go of cash or real estate or, my IRA, like I need to use that money because there's people like that sitting in the pews. Well, then that is an opportunity to talk about bequest or, a beneficiary designation in a life insurance plan or in the IRA. So like, there's still a gift opportunity that could go into a vision fund to do the next thing, right? Like,
Yep.
there's going to be more. But then it's like all this great vision, you guys should get involved, figure it out. And I was like, well, that's just not helpful because none of these people know what they're doing. And then you have like we had one louder guy who like was boisterous about all these things. I was like, this is not helpful. Like, we needed to actually put something in the hand of all these people that said, here's some options. And then like, here's somebody who could go, talk to you about it. If you wanted to do it in the privacy of, your home, and they could actually kind of walk through different assets and different timing and kind of make it custom to you. Like, how can you participate given your station in life right now or later? And we don't care what the answer is, just participate now or later, so
wow.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is ask, and don't be afraid to ask, because people want to. I mean, I think one of the things I tell clients that I work with is, and I'm not a fundraising expert like you, but I would tell them, I don't ask for money. I give them the opportunity to be part of a vision. And people want to partner in something bigger than themselves, and they want to be a part of it. But like you say, if we don't ask, there's no way they're going to be able to join. I know from television, with all the work I've done in TV advertising and promotions and fundraising and stuff, you have to tell them what you want them to do.
And how to do it. It's got to be super easy. Right.
Yes.
Like, this is what I need you to do. And this is the easiest way you can do it, or here's the 2 or 3 ways that you could do it. And if you want to know more, here's somebody who could help you,
Okay. So your company is Giving Design, givingdesign.com. Tell us how to find out more about David Baker, how to be a part of what you're doing and learn more. What are your resources? Give me the update.
Yeah. So givingdesign.com, and pretty much anything out there that, has a username at Giving Design, that's going to be us, whether it's on LinkedIn or whether it's, on the internet. So do that. Even on Instagram and other places, just at Giving Design will be us. On Instagram, it's probably just me. So, it's less of everybody else. But, we offer these classes. We call it a ministry fundraising blueprint. We do them about every other month. It's a 2-day virtual, but live experience. There's 3 of us that do the teaching. You don't just have to listen to me. There's like a younger communications expert, and then there's a younger guy who's been doing this also for 20 some years. He's built Salesforce databases. He understands automation, and he also understands sort of like working genius models. So it's a really holistic thing that all leans into major discipline gifts. So that's a 2-day thing. It's not quite all of 2 days, but you can find out more about that in our class. Like it's about every other month. There's you'll find one there. Super affordable, like dumb affordable. Like you should go do it. If you want to learn more. And we talk about storytelling. We talk about all of these things, sort of the gift menu. How do people give today, tomorrow, and in the future, and then how do they give now, later, and once in a lifetime giving. That both what are they giving toward, and then how are they doing it? Those are the 2 things, and we sort of equip you with all that. So that's the biggest thing. We have I hate the word newsletter. I need someone like you to tell me something better. Like we say, no.
I call my email my newsletter too. So I get what you mean.
We tell our clients, don't call it a newsletter. We need like impact communication. Like that's our we have a thing called Remarkable because we talk about like our whole job is to encourage remarkable generosity. That's cheerful, spiritual, and intentional. Like that's what we do. So we've got this newsletter. It probably skews theology a fair amount because we are a little nerdy like that, and we think that's like the source of all of this. And I think it's like sort of to be a source of life, you have to have a source of life. So I think that's that's sort of the first lesson for the average development person is like you need to be walking with Christ before you can be walking well with donors. So but sign up for a Remarkable, and you'll get that. I think that's even how we reconnected recently. You read something that I think Victoria wrote for Christmas. So every once in a while, there's some good stuff in there, and we tie it to the class, and we tie it to what we think is true donor stewardship versus what's being done in most places with stewardship. So I think that's the way to plug in.
Givingdesign.com, the key for everything, the home base for everything. If there was one last thought you'd leave to people, what would it be?
Start with what you've got. So most of the time we're looking for our next new donor. We have this thing about new donors, and most of the time your next big gift is already on board. So this may not be the case for the brand new startup person, but for any church or ministry that's even been in existence for 2 years, 18 months, like your best gift or the best introduction to your next gift is in your database. So, as you're growing, manage those people and make those genuine relationships, and that will pay off in the future. And it's less about who's my next donor as much as it is what's the next, experience I can give this existing donor. So I think that's start with who you have. And sort of honor those relationships, do them rightly.
David Baker, givingdesign.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We should talk again because I get so many emails from people who have a great idea for a ministry or a nonprofit or some kind of a cause, and they just don't know where to start when it comes to raising money to make it happen. So this is all good information. And I encourage people to go givingdesign.com. There's some great resources there. And who knows, God could have something incredible in mind for you. You just need to step out and be bold. So thanks so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. As I said in the opening, don't forget the Giving Room podcast is David's podcast, and also givingdesign.com, where you can find all of his resources, his online classes, things like that. It's just great. I want to encourage people. You know what? Step out, be bold. And if anybody wants to be a part of our nonprofit, The Influence Lab, take this advice and come get on our team. We always are looking for people who want to donate and support, helping train and teach Christians around the world to share their faith more effectively through the media. So everybody's got a great idea. And, our Influence Lab effort is a great part of that. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Phil Cooke Podcast.